Hi, this is me, Dara, at Elsa, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about how to handle Pluto trauma. So it seems like one of the truisms in astrology, and I've certainly seen it myself, is that people with significant Pluto placements or significant Pluto transits ultimately end up experiencing some trauma. This isn't surprising given that trauma is simply, it seems, part of human life. The question then is, what do we do about it? If it's such a universal thing, how do we handle carrying that with us? How do we move forward as strong, whole human beings after dealing with something like that? And looking into the psychology of it, it's really interesting what seems to happen after trauma. Many of us are familiar with post-traumatic stress. Those symptoms of fear, hypervigilance, nightmares, things like that. What we're not as familiar with, I think, are the ideas of post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic resilience. And these are things that are ultimately benefits that come from experiencing trauma. And what's really fascinating is that those don't seem to come in stages, and they also don't seem to happen to different people. And what I mean by that is that post traumatic growth and post traumatic stress seem to be present, co present, in the same people at the same time. And when I thought a little bit about myth and fairy tale and human stories, this made sense to me. So I wanted to tell you a nice Pluto tale and tie that in for you. So, there once was a girl who was the youngest of several sisters, and she was offered an engagement to the most wealthy grand baron in the area. The sisters didn't like this. They didn't trust him. He seemed off somehow, but the girl was taken with the idea of this grand new future, so she went. She went through with it, she got married, and she lived in this beautiful mansion. And it was all for her. Well, almost. Because, of course, he said, "My love, everything that you see is yours. This entire mansion is yours, except for one room. And I trust you not to go in that. By the way, I am going out of town, and here are all the keys to the house. Have fun." Right. We can all see where this is going, can't we? Of course, she does what we all would do. She explores. She looks in every nook and cranny of that castle. And then she gets to that one room. And of course she looks. Of course she does. What else could she do? Who wouldn't look? She gets that key. She opens the door, and she gasps. She screams. She sees all the old wives, all the previous wives laying in pools of blood as skeletons, various states of decay. She slams the door shut and she runs. And she looks with trembling hands at that key. But the key somehow, suddenly, is bleeding. It's bleeding and it's bleeding and it's bleeding, and she wants it to stop, and she doesn't know why it's happening, but there's blood everywhere, and no matter what she does, this trauma, this pain, this horror that she knows will not go away. It will not leave her alone. It will not leave her psyche. It is in her, and she cannot make it go away. And she is in terror. And then she hears footsteps, and he's home. And he asks for his keys. And she gives them to him, because what else could she do? And he knows. He knows what she's done. And he says, "That's it. Now's your time. Prepare to die." And she says, "Yes, I know, I'm prepared. I can do this. Just give me a moment. Give me a moment to pray." And because villains have egos, he let her. And she goes to her room and she screams for her sister. She screams and she screams. And because they never trusted him, and because this was her first or second night away from them, and because they were terrified, they were listening, and they heard her, and they come and they run and they dash him through with a spear, and he is gone, and she is saved. But if you really think about it, what saved her was that key. That key that kept bleeding, that was so insistent, that would not stop. Because think about what would have happened if it hadn't bled. She would have hid. She would have buried her head in the sand. She would have kept keeping that pain further and further and further away. She wouldn't have told her husband what happened. He would never have known. And one day, later on, he would come to her and he would say, "Come with me to this room. Come with me to my chamber." And she would go. And maybe she'd scream for her sisters. But a year or two down the line, everything would be normal and fine. Her sisters wouldn't be worried about her, so they wouldn't be listening. And I think that this really is the key. Because the moment that we know that post-traumatic stress, those tools, as I mentioned, the fear, the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the anxiety, the depression, the moment that those turn into post-traumatic growth is when we recognize how valuable they are, how beautiful they are. Those tools kept us alive. Those tools are the reason that we still exist. Those symptoms, those things that keep us up at night, that will not stop, that will not go away, are the reasons that we are here right now. And when we recognize that, we realize that these tools are here for us, to help us, and they always will be. And so we can put these tools away where they go, into our belt, to be used whenever we need them, at any time. But also we know, as time goes on, as we develop that post-traumatic resilience and growth, that we get to choose now. We get to use our intellect and our judgment, and we get to choose when those tools are used and when they are safely in our belt. And when we recognize that our trauma is our growth and that our most painful tools are also our saviors, that's when we build the resilience, and that's when our trauma becomes our growth. This has been me, Dara, with Elsa. I hope it helped. Thanks.